It's not remotely hyperbole to say that nearly the entire world has been going through the 5 stages of grief since Donald Trump was sworn in as president for his second term. As he started showing signs of abandoning the established world order and using the economic muscle of the United States to upend alliances, they started with denial. Why, they asked, was he giving away concessions to Putin's Russia, even before Ukraine negotiations had begun? In complete denial that Trump wasn't negotiating on behalf of Ukraine, he was using Ukraine as leverage to try to get other things he wanted from Vladimir Putin. That led into anger, with lots of talk of decoupling defence systems and economic systems. Then bargaining, as it sank in just how embedded they currently were and how difficult that would be to achieve. And then in the last couple of weeks, depression, as it became clear that Trump's bargaining stage, namely the negotiation of trade deals and defence relationships and so on, that was largely the whole point. From his point of view, that he's determined to exploit every scrap of leverage he has over others to force them into an egregiously one-sided relationship. So you had Canada engaged in apparently productive talks. Then Trump called a halt because of a digital services tax. So Canada dropped that tax in order to get those talks back on track. Trump's press secretary crowed to journalists that Mark Carney and Canada had caved to Donald Trump. Just another insult to add to the growing long list. Then, having gotten back on track, Trump simply announced a 35% tariff against Canada anyway, just making the point that constructive discussions weren't the point. He's going to inflict more and more pain until countries agree to give up vastly more to the US than they get back. Europe was in a similar position. It was used to negotiating hard on trade and spending a lot of time focusing on detail to get to win-win solutions. Well, Trump just announced that they would get hit by a 30% tariff. He's not interested in win-win solutions. He wants win-lose, as long as he's doing the winning. Negotiations continue. Everyone's still looking for the least worst option they can get in the short term. But with this latest round of performative tariff announcements, we're getting the sense that this has moved everyone to the final stage of grief. Acceptance. They mostly now understand this is all a power game, and they're not going to get a fair deal. They're not going to get a settlement that leads to stability in the future, even if they accept a relatively unfair deal to get there. America is using every scrap of power it has to keep pushing and grabbing a little bit more and a little bit more. Not because it needs that little bit more to achieve an essential national interest, just because it can. And it's institutionally greedy. So while they're continuing to play, they increasingly understand that since the United States has torn up the old world order and the old world trading system, they need to rebuild those things, and in so doing to cut America out. And not because that's what they would have chosen, not because they dislike Donald Trump. Foreign relations and trade is a relentlessly pragmatic pursuit, but because it's the only way to reduce the power that can be used against them by people who have demonstrated their dedication to doing so. So, while Europe was letting it be known today that it would pause its planned retaliatory action against the US tariffs, in line with Trump's revised deadline for the start of August, it was announcing a substantial agreement with Indonesia. While Trump is telling Indonesia that its goods would carry a 32% tariff in the United States, the EU is agreeing practically zero tariffs both ways with it. Ursula von der Leyen told a press conference, "We are living in turbulent times, and when economic uncertainty meets geopolitical volatility, partners like us must come closer together." Indonesia currently exports apparel, shoes, copper, stainless steel, palm oil and a variety of other products. Hit by high tariffs by the United States, the level of those exports would fall significantly, possibly affecting 300,000 jobs. But with a close to zero tariff pact with Europe, a lot of those exports could end up going to there instead. And this is just the latest sign. The EU specifically has been pulling closer to Canada, which is obviously highly motivated in its own right to find alternative sources for its products. It is working towards closer ties with India and South Africa and with other countries across South America and Asia. The one thing all of those countries have in common is that all of them are expecting reduced trade with the United States and are experiencing the Trump administration trying to take them for everything that they can. The ground, you might say, has never been more fertile for the EU to seek win-win relationships. And of course, all those countries are also looking to each other as well. Canada's building bonds with Southeast Asia, Brazil and Mexico are deepening their own relationship. Brazil and India announced that they're aiming to increase trade with each other by 70%, and so on and so on. Now, of course, China has likewise been seeking to court various countries, particularly in Asia, presenting itself as the more stable, reliable superpower trade partner in comparison to Trump. Interestingly, while there's some receptivity to that, there's also a degree of pushback. According to the New York Times, EU officials have floated the idea of building trade structures that exclude both the United States and China. Because sure, China may not be to blame for Trump, but it did nevertheless subsidise its key industries to the degree that they flooded markets with cheap goods. Now, a number of commentators are starting to raise the question whether all of these countries might start to coordinate. Rather than them just collaborating with each other one-to-one, would it benefit them further to coordinate their retaliations to American tariffs, to gang up against Trump, in other words? Senior fellow at research organisation Bruegel, Jakob Funk Kierkegaard, was one of these. Working together would give them leverage of their own to counter Trump's, he argued. Such coordination, he said, would be the rational thing to do. Personally, I think it's unlikely, at least in the open, in the way that he's advocating. To understand why, you only have to look at what's been happening with the BRICS coalition and Donald Trump. The BRICS group, you'll remember, originally comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, now grown somewhat larger, had considered at some point whether it could collaborate to challenge the dominant role of the dollar as the global reserve currency. The answer is probably not. Not quickly anyway, given how far removed the dollar is from all of its rivals, and the nearest one is actually the euro. But the mere possibility of it apparently chilled Donald Trump to the bone. So he recently announced he would add an extra 10% tariff on top of all the other tariffs to any countries that aligned themselves with the BRICS group. It's a reminder that Trump had already separately warned countries not to gang up against the United States. So long as some countries achieve a deal with the US that means that they feel they have something to lose, then they won't risk being pushed out of that position by being seen to collaborate. And even if countries end up deciding to swallow Trump's bigger tariff rates because they're not prepared to meet the aggressive demands America's making of them, they will know that if they aggravate Trump further, there are still many more ways for him to target them. So they will be looking to boil the orange-skinned frog. Just one-to-one strike beneficial deals, nothing to do with America, nothing to draw attention, just piece by piece reduce their exposure to them. At some point in the future, when America has hastened its decline, is too burdened by suddenly more expensive debt to be the dynamic force it once was, well, then the situation may be different. But there's also the factor where a lot of countries don't simply want to play by China and Russia's script. We saw this with the latest BRICS summit. Xi Jinping wasn't in personal attendance, Vladimir Putin could only dial in because Brazil's a member of the International Criminal Court and would hence be obliged to arrest him if he attended there. And what we saw was Lula da Silva of Brazil and Narendra Modi of India stepping up. Those are two of the democracies in BRICS, which has recently grown, but mostly with autocracies. And analysts close to the action were saying this represented a pushback against China and Russia's vision of the BRICS as the core for their alternative world order, predominantly there to oppose and undermine the West. India and Brazil, amongst others, are not interested in just signing on to the global bipolar dynamic by throwing their weight in with China and Russia and their own agendas. Rather, they wanted to bolster the emerging economies of the world, maximising their ability to deal more equally with all the players in a radically changing world. And Trump's disastrous mistakes in driving all of America's allies away and isolating itself, sure, that provides an opportunity for movement, for change in relative powers. They just reportedly don't see that they benefit by throwing their lot in with China. If it becomes as dominant as the US has been, it will likely behave just as badly. And that will help as well in avoiding Trump beast mode, which is always on hand if he gets the sense that people are ganging up on him, especially if they're ganging up with China. But whether they officially coordinate or not, the effect will be much the same. And not just in trade. Right now, as Trump dismantles America's science base, particularly in medical and climate science, various countries across the world are seizing the opportunity for a momentous, what they're calling a brain gain, taking the potential breakthrough research that America no longer values and seeking to benefit from it. China is competing hard in that space, of course. And the fact that more young Africans right now are learning Mandarin should give you an indication that many are now looking to opportunities in Beijing, not just, for example, in the under fire Harvard. And likewise in defence spending. Fewer countries buying American F-35s, more looking to alternative suppliers. Now, all of this is self-inflicted, of course, by America. And the astonishing thing, as far as I can see, is that Trump doesn't even realise what he's done. Stephen Mirand, chair of the White House Council on Economic Advisers, was crowing just the other day about the tariff deal between the United States and Vietnam, celebrating because it was, in his words that he used on television, extremely one-sided. We get to apply a significant tariff to Vietnamese exports. They're opening their markets to ours, applying zero tariff to our exports. It's a fantastic deal for Americans, he said. Do these clowns not realise, or just not care, that the world is listening when they say those sorts of things on American television? Especially when he's talking about a deal that hasn't even been signed yet. It's a sort of behaviour you can only indulge when you are supremely confident that the other parties have no choices. They have to submit to you because, well, you have all the cards. Well, it's going to take a while. But the world is busily working towards the moment when there is some serious payback on that sort of hubris. Within a decade, maybe a lot sooner, the world is going to look and feel very different to how it does today. And that will have started here. It started with America gleefully celebrating its power to bully the entire world. It started with the world working through those 5 stages of grief and reaching the final stage of acceptance. But not acceptance of Trump's world order, rather of the need to build something stronger, specifically without him. When that reckoning comes, it won't be negotiated. It'll have been inherited from a 6-month period of stupidity.